So let me get rid of that. All right. We're here with malware analysis. We're going to be analyzing Windows 32-bit malware. Not much 64-bit malware and not Linux malware or anything here. This class is in fact primarily Windows internals. What you're mostly going to learn is how Windows code works and all these strange little ways you can trick Windows code into doing what it shouldn't be doing, which is what malware does. And we'll talk, and when I first heard about, need some more? Yeah, grab some more. When I first heard about malware analysis, I thought it was like black magic. Like you get a virus, it's got maybe 50 kilobytes of machine code, and I thought somebody read through that stuff line by line in assembler and figured it out. And that is one way to do it, but that is beyond the capacity of most normal mortals. And that is not the most efficient way to do it. What's happened in the meantime is tools and techniques have been developed to do this much more easily. And although you sometimes look at the assembly code, you try to avoid that because that is the most difficult thing. And you learn how to do it even if you can't read a lot of assembler very well. Of course, the better you can read assembler, the more powerful you are. But even if you're not very good at assembler, you can still get a lot done. And so we'll talk about, there's 4 general ways to do it. There's basic static analysis, where you do things like upload it to an antivirus company and see if they've already figured it out for you. Then there's basic dynamic analysis, where you deliberately infect a machine and let it run and see what it does by just measuring the network traffic, the registry keys, the processes, the files created. That turns out to be very easy to do and very effective. Then there's advanced static analysis, which is where you look at the binary code, disassemble it and try to figure it out in IDA Pro. And then there's advanced dynamic analysis, where you run it in a debugger where you can modify the code while it runs and stop it partway through to see what it does dynamically. And those are the basic techniques, but the first 2 are quite easy. The last 2 require a lot of skill, disassembly skill and debugging skill, and we'll do the very basics of that, but we won't get too far into it. The only reason this class is possible is because of Mandiant. Mandiant is the company that invented instant response in the modern form. They did all the advanced resistant threats, starting with China and expanding to others. Got bought out by FireEye, but Kevin Mandia is now the CEO of FireEye, from what I hear. So they basically took over. And they wrote this book, and they wrote a bunch of fake malware to work on, without which there'd be no way to do any hands-on projects. If you take SANS classes, you'll have to pay thousands of dollars for them, but you will work with real malware. I can't work with real malware in this kind of uncontrolled environment. I can't put it in a lab, so we're working with the fake malware, which is why this is possible. There's now a bunch of hands-on projects using harmless fake malware. All right, so there are quizzes. They're online. You have to do them before class. They're up for a week or longer. You do them in the online system. After the first couple of weeks, the quizzes will be due, and the goal is the quiz on the chapter is due before the lecture on that chapter. This is something new I'm trying this semester to encourage people to read the book. I found out a lot of people weren't reading the book, and coincidentally, they didn't seem to be learning anything in the book. So this was a technique suggested to me to improve that, and we'll see how well it works. Anyway, all right, the other thing to mention is the grading and such, which should be here, which is the same as all my other classes. There's a bunch of quizzes, a bunch of hands-on projects, a final exam, and a bunch of points. So 90% an A and 80% a B, and so on. So the quizzes are multiple choice, online, an open book. It is cheating if you get someone else to actually do the quiz for you, but if you look up the answers, that's acceptable because it's just there to encourage you to study before class. So you should have some familiarity with it. It's just a way to trick you into going over the material several times. You have to go over it and over it and over it if you want to learn it. The final exam is on paper, and that's not open book. You have to show up and take it if you want to take it. Now, you have alternatives to do a lot of projects, so you don't need to do the final exam. That's a popular option in all my classes, and that's because there's a bunch of projects, and then there's a bunch of extra credit projects. And if you do them, they add more points, and if you do enough of them, you often find you can get an A without taking the final exam, which is fine with me, because that means you know how to do something, presumably. All right. So the projects are all pretty much practicing various techniques to analyze that fake malware we have, and a few other things. All right, so if people cheat in class and turn in someone else's homework as your own, I'll just throw you out of the program. If you're going to be a security professional, you are going to have power, like a police officer. And if you are so stupid you have no clue about the difference between right and wrong, then you should not have that power. You'll just get yourself in trouble. And this happens all the time. I subscribe to the FBI's Twitter feed. It's good, clean fun. People do this all the time. The FBI agents in Silk Road stole the Bitcoins and went to jail. There's network administrators at hospitals that peek at the records to see what disease a celebrity has and sell it to the National Enquirer, and they go to jail. You've got to have some self-control if you're going to be a security professional, because you are going to have the ability to do bad things. So if you don't, you're on the other side and you should wander off and get a clue. Anyway, so any questions about anything? Well, I want to start with the first chapter. Oh, one crazy thing is the online book is numbered from 1 to N, and the paper book starts at 0. So anyway, that's a thing to know. So that's why I put the entire title of the chapters here, so there'd be no ambiguity, because the numbers are not consistent, which is sort of silly, but as errors go in a book, that's not too serious a one. All right. So here's the goals of malware analysis, and consider this. I had one of my students call me with a case like this. So they're a big medical clinic with multiple locations. They found a virus on one of their workstations. They hired him to just re-image that workstation and say, okay, you're done, you can go home now. And he called me up and said, I don't feel like I'm done. And I said, you're right, you're not done. This is like you find one roach and you step on it and say, there, that's all fixed now. The question is, how did it get there? What else got there? How many things are infected? Did they get the server? Did they get the health records? This is the whole point of modern incident response. You have to decide how big is the problem. If it's really just one workstation, then that might be a good response, but it's probably not. That's probably the tip of an iceberg. So anyway, that's a common issue. So you want to know, is the attacker really gone? Are they still in the network stealing stuff? What did they steal? Because if they stole certain things, we have to go and notify the government agencies overseeing us and all sorts of good things. And anyway, you really have to go to root cause analysis and find out how did this happen and fix that hole so it doesn't happen again. So LinkedIn tried this technique. LinkedIn got hacked. A Russian, and the person who stole it could not crack all the password hashes, so he took a small group of, I think, 60,000 password hashes and put it on a public forum in a Russian hacking forum saying, can somebody help me hack these? And I cracked these, and they weren't that hard to crack. I knew how to crack them, and a bunch of us, over the next few days, LinkedIn had no statement to everyone saying, did you get hacked? They said, oh, no, we didn't get hacked. But a lot of us, including me, looked at the passwords, cracked them, and found our password in there. And I said, dude, you really got hacked. That's my password. And so after it became impossible to continue lying about it, they made a statement saying, yes, we appear to have had a breach of a total of 60,000 hashed passwords and nothing else, which, by the way, is essentially impossible. But then they said, we asked our lawyers, and our lawyers told us a hashed password by itself is not personally identifiable information, so you are under no obligation to do anything about this at all, and we're going to do nothing. That was their statement. And we said, wait a minute. You can't just do nothing. You can't pretend that that doesn't mean they stole it all. And indeed, they eventually had to pay at least $1 million cleaning it up because they found out you can't just do nothing. But anyway, if you had any actual integrity and you wanted to protect your customers, doing nothing would not be okay for that reason either. I thought it was funny, the email came out from the VW executive 3 or 4 years ago where they said, look, we're cheating on the emissions. Is that a problem? And he said, well, we have to decide. If we're honest, that's a problem. If we're not honest, that's no problem. And put this in writing so it goes to court later. If you're going to do a thing like that, don't put it in writing. Anyway, so there's the point. If you're analyzing malware, you have this sample of a virus or something that's come in, and you could spend months analyzing it and write a PhD thesis, but that's probably not your goal. Most humans have simpler goals, like you want to know, how did it get in? So how do I stop ones like this from getting in? What harm did it do so I can fix the harm? And that's really about it. How to get rid of it and what harm did it do me is what people want to know. So you don't want to solve every little detail of the malware. You want to get the important points. How did it get in? What are the indicators of compromise that I can look at to tell me which machines are infected? And what is sufficient to clean it off and block it from coming back in? So you often want to create signatures. You can have host-based signatures that will look at the results of the malware. These are indicators of compromise, like files created or registry keys on the target. And the network signature is the antivirus signature that will detect the file passing on the wire so you can stop it before it hits, or at least that's the host intrusion protection system signature. And both of these are useful. Unfortunately, both these techniques are subject to false positives. And we had a really dramatic one here when a contractor came and we had a crooked chief technology officer who hired a crook that he had a previous relationship with to come here and pretend that we all had viruses which weren't there. And he went straight to the press and made no attempt to fix it and told us all that we could not even examine these infected machines because they were being held to preserve evidence for an FBI investigation, which was all false. One of his many problems was that I had a better relationship with the FBI than he did, and they contacted me and said, what's going on? But anyway, it took us about 2 years to push him out, but it is very common that your security devices lie to you and tell you there's a problem when there really isn't a problem. And again, you want to have the skills to analyze something and decide what really happened. So this is what I summarized a bit earlier, static analysis. Basic static analysis, you examine it without running it. You get a sample of the virus and you can use virus total or strings. Virus total, you just pass it up to a Google engine that runs all the antivirus products on it and tells you if one of them recognizes it. If that happens, of course, life is easy. You can go to that company's website and find out all about it. You can run strings, which will show you the readable strings in it. So you do not have to try to read the code, you just see the text, but the text might be enough. You'll see text for if it's a DDoS attack, you'll see text saying execute UDP attack, and so on. The strings will often give you a pretty good clue what it is. And then you can go to a disassembler, like IDA Pro, and really get down to the binary, turn it into assembly language, and really read that stuff. And it takes a lot of skill to do that, but if you get good at that, there are a lot of companies that want to hire you. That's a in-demand skill, people that can really efficiently read disassembled code. I don't think you're going to get there in this class, but you'll get the little step into it. Then there's dynamic analysis. You just run it in a virtual machine and see what it does. And there are a bunch of tools. When I first heard this, I thought this was insane. You're going to infect a machine, then you're going to run a bunch of monitoring tools on the compromised operating system, and you're going to record what they say. This is sloppy and stupid. Why do you believe what Process Monitor tells you when it's running on the system that's running the malware? The malware could be hiding its activities from the tool, but in practice, most of it doesn't. So this is the easy, fast, sloppy way to do it. You run tools on the compromised system, and if the malware is not smart enough to fool those tools, you find out what it's doing. So you always try this first, and you only go to more advanced techniques if you have to. You can also do RAM analysis with a variety of tools. Mandiant pushes their Redline product. I used it last semester, and it was very ineffective. Volatility is much more powerful. Anyway, so that's basic static analysis. You look at the file itself, and you look at the strings, and this only looks at the very surface of it. It doesn't really look at the behavior in any detail. And the same thing's true of dynamic analysis. You let it run and see what it does. Some malware is smart enough to know that is happening and block it. A lot of modern malware, well, not a lot, but more malware all the time, is smart enough to know when it's running in a virtual machine and refuse to run, or know when it's running in an analysis tool and refuse to run. Advanced static analysis is where you actually read a lot of the code and figure out what it's doing. And advanced dynamic analysis is where you analyze the running code with a debugger. So backdoors let the attacker control the system. Botnets add your system to an army, all controlled from one command and control server. Downloaders are pieces of malware that download another piece. Almost all malware comes in many stages. First there's a little bit, then it downloads some more, then it downloads some more, several stages of infection. Then there's things that steal information, keyloggers and other things, stealing password hashes. There's launchers that just launch other programs, and there's rootkits. Rootkits are the main way you permanently own a system. Once you put a rootkit on the machine, you have a hidden secret backdoor typically into it, and you can run processes and make network connections on that machine, and they will be invisible to the machine. That's the plan of a rootkit. So even if people are running virus scanners and trying to list all the files and list all the processes and network connections, the malicious ones will not appear on the list because you have subverted the operating system's tools to inspect its own system. That's what rootkits are supposed to do. And once you get infected with a rootkit, it is very difficult to detect and very difficult to remove. So scareware is another one, of course, tricking people into doing something. This one was pretty good. Someone got malware that said, we have detected child pornography on your machine, and he really did have child pornography on his machine. He really went and turned himself into the cops, thinking he'd been caught. So occasionally it has some good results. Then there's spam and worms and viruses. the mass malware is the most common type where exactly the same binary goes to many machines, and that's really the only thing antivirus can stop, is if many people are getting hit with the exact same binary. What's much more effective is when you modify the malware and target it against one area, one target. That is almost impossible to stop, and that's what Stuxnet is, that's what the advanced persistent threats from the military and the intelligence community are, and there is nothing you can buy that will stop that stuff, not really. Instead, you have to have network monitoring and intrusion and incident response that detects when bad things are happening and responds to limit the damage. But you can't buy a box that will stop those things on the wire. The people are talking, by the way, and it is not a joke anymore, about artificial intelligence. Buying a box that really is AI and really does figure out how to stop zero-day attacks. People are starting to talk about this seriously, but I don't think we're down to the level where there's anything you can buy yet that will really do it effectively. But that is around the corner. Probably in 5 years, there'll be versions of that for sale, an AI box that blocks 0 days to some extent. So here's the general rules. You're going to be constantly flooded with far too much information. A baffling screen full of hexadecimal memory dumps and instruction codes and strings and a complicated diagram with arrows going everywhere, and you could spend forever being lost in that maze, and you can't let that happen. This is sort of like being a top executive at a company. You've got thousands of geniuses doing complicated stuff that you can't even understand, and you somehow have to drive the ship. So you have to gloss over the details and get the main points, which is very difficult for me because I started by learning mathematics, and ever since I was able to read, the rule was you read one sentence and you do not move to the next sentence until you completely understand this one. And you got to get over that and sort of skim through things to get the high points. That's the only way to get there. If your tools don't work, and they often don't, all these are hacking tools, and the enemy is intelligent. So frequently the enemy has deliberately modified their thing to break the typical tools. So if your tool's not working, just try another tool and another tool. This is the essence of hacking. You just try every door. You don't spend a long time trying to figure out why my first attack didn't work, because you're trying to get the answer. You're not trying to write a thesis analyzing every little way this tool can go wrong. You don't really care. You have to keep your eye on the goal and move in things that will more efficiently get you towards the goal, and don't get bogged down in little problems. All right, I got a few iClicker questions, and yeah, we only have, so come grab one of these. You should leave your name behind. You can write it on a scrap of paper, or you can put some card in there like a student ID that is not very important. Don't put in credit cards or anything, because students might take your card. That happens now and then, so just write your name on a scrap of paper if you don't have anything unimportant, like a business card or student ID. What's that?
Security cost. How can someone run my credit card?
That's right. And this is because this is the way it is. There is a risk, and there is I warn you not to mitigate that risk. But that's right. That's why if someone gets their identity stolen in the security class, that's humiliating. So I often go through the first day or two and try to make sure there are no credit cards in there, because that's hurtful, you know. All right. Let me get my software running. Here we go. Start new session. Yes. Okay, good. All right, so turn it on and hit a button. We should see some votes here. Okay. We've got 8 live people, 11 live people. Okay, 11 may be the number of the county. By the way, why don't you open a window back there, Dylan? I think it's hot in here. I don't know about you guys. Anyway, if you can reach one. Maybe too hard to reach. Anyway, all right. Anyway, so, all right. So here we go. Which technique requires you to deliberately infect a computer? All right, I'll quit at 25. Looks like the answers are pretty much in. All right, that's dynamic analysis. Requires you to run the malware. So of course, you do it in a virtual machine that you can revert back to its original state or throw away when you're done. All right. Which technique can find many infected computers from a single point of measurement? It's very nice if you can get it to work.
That's what Ben's presentation on is,
At B-sides, you say?
yeah.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I'll quit at 25. And that's, of course, network signatures. And you'll do that quite a bit. One of the most common ones is when it phones home. Then you can tell which ones are infected by watching the signal where they phone home to get commands. So it's very nice. If the malware has some clear network signature you can identify, that makes it easy to tell how far it has spread. All right. Which technique involves running parts of the code and stopping at breakpoints? I'll quit at 25. All right, that's debugging. There are, by the way, two kinds of debuggers. Real programmers typically use source level debuggers where you work from the source code like C or Java, and that would be nice, but we don't have that luxury. We're working with object code debuggers that work from the runnable executable in assembler, which is much more difficult, but that's what you have to do with malware because very few malware gives you source code to work with. That's why I thought it was kind of funny. The CS department tried to remove part of this course from the course outline, saying, we teach debuggers, you're not allowed to teach debuggers. And I said, well, I could have this argument. Fine, I'll just cross it out. I don't care. Because there's no auditing where they compare your course to the actual outline, see. So I just give them whatever they want. Sure, fine. But debuggers are, of course, quite useful for us, but they're not the same kind of debuggers you'd learn over in a coding class. All right. Which technique may alert attackers that you've detected an intrusion? I think I forgot to mention this, but I'll mention it after this. I'm quitting at 25. All right, you may or may not know this, but VirusTotal, if you send a file up to VirusTotal for analysis, they send it to the antivirus companies. And so, therefore, people say, like Mandiant says, if you are under attack and you find malware in the system, do not send it to VirusTotal, because the advanced persistent threat actors carefully mark each piece of malware for each target, and they watch VirusTotal, and when someone detects it, they know they've been busted. And you want to analyze it without the attacker knowing that you're analyzing them, so you can figure it out and kick them out. If they notice your early attempts to stop them, they will just dig in deeper and change their techniques, and you'll just make your job harder. You want to analyze their attack in secret with OPSEC, with operational security, and then attack them by surprise with much more knowledge than they expect you to have, or you will never really succeed in kicking them out. Anyway. So what kind of malware spreads to other systems? I'll quit at 25. All right, and on that list, it's a worm. There used to be these things called viruses that hid in the boot sector, floppies, non-executable things. Nowadays, it's pretty much all worms that spread through network connections. All right, and what malware conceals other code? I'll quit at 25. All right, and that is the rootkit. That's what it does, hides other code. All right, so, carry on a bit here. So basic static analysis, like I say, you run it through antivirus engines. Well, what you can do, you don't want to send the whole file up to VirusTotal because that'll get you busted. What you can do is calculate the MD5 hash and then send the hash up to VirusTotal. And they will see if it's on a list, but they won't bother telling any antivirus company because they can't analyze a hash. So that's what you do if you want to get that information without violating your OPSEC. And then you can look at strings, functions, and headers of a file, which is not as difficult as really reading the assembly code. It's looking for things you can get easily. So antivirus scanning, this is only a first step because it's very easy to change the signature. Mutating code is very easy, and getting past antivirus is very easy. So VirusTotal is a simple way to do it, but that's only going to work if your attacker is very lame and they're actually using identical binaries on many systems, and that's a pretty weak attack. That's pretty weak defense. So you can make a hash, MD5 or SHA-1, then you have a fingerprint, which can uniquely identify the binary, but if even one bit is different, the whole hash will be different. So it's only going to find out if that exact identical file has been analyzed before. Windows doesn't provide hash functions. By default, you have to download some utility like hashcalc, which is kind of rude. On Linux, it's included. But anyway, it's a well-known procedure. There's a thing I used to use called Filealyzer, and it is so rude that the hash values are wrong. Now that is pretty rude. Anyway, hopefully they finally fixed that. But anyway, you can label your malware file with this. You can share the hash with other people. If you send a copy of it to anyone, you should send the hash along so they can make sure they really got the exact file and they got it all. You commonly check hash values when you download things to make sure that you didn't get a defective or malicious download that's been altered. Then there's strings. Strings just goes through the file and it finds any series of printable ASCII characters that's longer than a certain threshold, like 4 or 5 characters. So it will sometimes happen to find something that meets that criteria that's just random letters in binary code, but most of the time it really is readable stuff. So you can look for ASCII strings or Unicode strings. ASCII is the older system, which works only for English, where you have 1 byte for each character, and so here's BAD and you terminate it with a null. Unicode is for international languages like Japanese and Chinese and Arabic and everything, so it has 2 bytes per character. Now if you have English text, the second byte is always 0, but if you have other languages, it uses both bytes to have enough combinations to express all the characters in more complicated languages. And so you have to tell your string utility which one you're looking for, because if it's looking for ASCII and you have Unicode, it'll appear to only have 1 letter long text everywhere, and it won't find the strings. This hit me over the break. Over the break, I was analyzing a lot of Android applications, and there's one that stored your password in plain text, but it's stored it in Unicode, and it was a while before I caught it, because my simple Unix commands were not finding it. All right, so strings is native in Linux. You can get strings itself for Windows. You can get other utilities that do it too, and this will just find all the strings. So if you run strings on an executable file like bp6.ex underscore, it will just give you a list of all the strings here. Now, a few of these just look like random things, $. This is an IP address. This is the name of a DIL, a Windows library it's using. These look like functions it's calling in that DIL. And so you get some idea what it's doing. This thing apparently sends email, and under some circumstances sends error messages about the email, and maybe it's sending it to this address, or maybe that's the command and control server, so you can get some ideas about what it's doing without bothering to read the code. That's the point of this. Bin text is one of the friendly ways to do this on Windows, where you get a graphical environment to do this. If you don't want to install strings and use the command line command, it all amounts to the same thing. Now, a lot of malware is, this analysis is so common and so simple that a lot of malware has a countermeasure to stop this, and that's packing or obfuscating. A simple form of packing is to just zip things. So you have a self-unzipper. Now what happens is the original zipped file will not have any readable strings because it's been compressed. You'd have to unzip it to be able to read the strings, and that's what packing does. There's also obfuscation. So you compress the thing, and therefore all the original executable is now scrambled and packed, so all the strings are gone. And if you run strings, you'll just see the strings of the wrapper package, which will be just a few strings, and it won't tell you anything about the malware. PEID is a utility we'll use that just makes an attempt to identify the type of malware, and it will tell you if it's packed with a known packer. One of the common open source packers is UPX. So this will tell you this file is packed with UPX. You're going to have to unpack it before I can tell you more about it. So I'm not going to do it live because we got other things to do, but UPX I made a file here, and I packed it. So the compiled version of this executable file was 500 kilobytes, but after packing it was only 270 kilobytes. And when you run strings on it, on the original one, I find 1900 strings, but in the unpacked one, or the packed one, I got less strings. On the right, 23,000, I think is the number. Anyway, that's characters right now, words. Anyway, it's, of course you find a different number of strings, and they look different too. By the way, this is something to be aware of. A lot of tools that you think are not running the malware do in fact run it, like debuggers, and apparently PEID under certain circumstances. So you should do all your analysis in a virtual machine. Don't just do it in your host machine and think that your tool is not running the malware unless you're sure. And here's another really rotten thing. I used to go to the Google cache to analyze like malicious websites, and there are websites where I happen to know that the person running the website hates my guts and is trying to find out where I am and hurt me. And this kind of nonsense has cut down since like 2011 and 2012. But anyway, there were times when I wanted to view a website without leaving a trail of who I was, and I wasn't going through Tor or anything, so I used the Google cache, and the Google cache does not do that. The Google cache loads the HTML code from Google, and it loads all the images right from the main site. Very rude. So it's a thing to know. Don't assume that that tool is not doing nasty things with the malware, because sometimes they are. So you got to know the portable executable file format. All Windows executables are in this category. These are portable because they can be moved in memory. And that's so you can have address space layout randomization, which all modern versions of Windows have. If you launch Notepad and then you close it and launch it again, it launches in a different part of memory. To stop attackers from being able to easily inject code and run it, the attacker doesn't really know where they are. Every program thinks it's at location 400,000 in hex. It's like a virtual machine. It doesn't really know where it is. It's portable executable. All the jumps are relative. Anyway, this is every Windows executable you're going to see is a PE file. And so there's a header which tells it what type of application it is, what libraries it uses, and its space. Lord PE is a cool tool that will let you analyze files on the disk. It will also let you analyze files from RAM. You can go into running memory. I think I'll demonstrate it later, not tonight. But you can take a copy of a file from RAM and examine its structure. This is really important because the file is packed or encrypted on the disk. You can run it and then steal the executable from RAM, nicely cutting through that problem. All right, so here's the main sections. It will show you the section header of the file, and here it will show it in a friendly form. There are in principle a lot of PE files you can have, but they almost always have this: text, data, resource, and reloc. Text is the actual assembly language instructions that command it to do things. Data is the static data, parameters and such are used by it. Resources are things like icons and other little things that are used in the program. And reloc is used to relocate the code if it has to be moved around in memory. It has to do with that portable part, the portable executable, and we'll go into quite a lot more detail about it later because it can be used to trick malware, trick programs into running the wrong thing. So there are a lot more sections, but those are the main ones. That's enough for now. So I got a few eye clickers about that stuff, and then we'll take a break, and I'll hand out ad codes to those who need them. All right, so which technique has a mathematical number that will uniquely identify a file? I'm quitting at 25. All right, and that is hashing. By the way, if you want to get real picky, MD5 is not a perfect hash, and SHA-1 is better, and SHA-2 is even better. But for purposes of malware analysis, they're all good enough. Because even though you can make an MD5, manipulate an MD5, it takes a lot of computing power and bother to do it. So if you have two things with the same MD5, the odds are like 99% that they really are identical. Anyway, all right. Which technique will find the readable text? which is very handy because it just removes all the stuff that would be hard to understand anyway. This should always be one of your first techniques because it's fast and easy to learn something. And if the easy techniques work, you don't have to bother with the hard ones. All right, so that's strings. All right. By the way, even before you do strings, if you're on a Linux system, you run file, and file tells you what kind of file it is. But anyway, all right. So what's the file type with a header specifying sections like text, data, and resource? Quitting at 25. All right, those are PE files, portable executable, which is primarily EXEs and DILs are the two most common kind of portable executable files, but there are also these things called COM files, way back from the days of MS-DOS, that are also portable executable files. All right. And what kind of file is shared by many programs? I'll quit at 25. All right, and that's DILs. That stands for Dynamic Link Library. And so your EXE does things, but if you have something like opening a network socket you want to do, you typically call a DIL, which is something Microsoft wrote to do that job for you. All right, so let's take a break until 7, and I'll stop the recording. We'll have a little bit more of this to go through after 7, so don't take off. This is 126. And people that